All right, so have you ever noticed how sometimes, like when the sun is setting or just after it rises, the light just hits different?
Oh yeah, it's almost magical, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the world suddenly looks like, I don't know, like a movie or something. Totally.
And photographers go crazy for it. It's called golden hour.
Golden, okay, yeah, I've heard of that. Is it just like the hour after sunrise and the hour before sunset?
Yeah, pretty much. It's when the sun is super low in the sky.
So why is that light so special, though? I mean, like scientifically.
So because the sun's so low, its light has to travel through way more of the Earth's atmosphere to get to us. All good.
Okay,
And that filters out a lot of the blue light, leaving those warm golden colors.
that's why it's so flattering too, right? Like everyone looks good in golden hour light.
For sure, it's way less harsh than that mid-base sun. No more squinty eyes or lewd shadows.
Sold. So, how do we make sure we're in the right place at the right time to capture this golden hour goodness?
The first step, honestly, is to just pay attention to the sun. Like, really watch it for a few days.
Okay, so like become a sun stalker.
Exactly. See how light changes in your area throughout the day, especially the day before a shoot.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about those times when you're like traveling or in new place? Is there a way to like predict the golden hour without becoming a meteorologist?
Oh, absolutely. There are some awesome apps designed just for this. Photo Pills, Sun Surveyor, Golden Hour. One, they're lifesavers.
Wait, so these apps can actually tell you when and where the golden hour will be.
Yeah, like they use your location and the date to pinpoint the exact times for sunrise and sunset, the direction the sun will be in, everything. That's great.
Wait,
None
other
of them
than
even have this augmented reality feature where you can point your phone at a scene and it'll show you the sun's path.
no way, that's like next level.
It's amazing for planning your shots.
Okay, gotta download those.
And don't forget the weather. A few clouds can make for some amazing sunsets, but if it's totally overcast, golden hour might be a bust.
Right, no point showing up to a gray sky expecting magic. Bruh. So we've stalked the sun, picked a spot, checked the weather. What about the camera itself? Like, how do we make sure it's set up to capture golden hour right?
First things first, forget about JPEGs for this. Shoot in RAW format.
Rough on that. Why is that so important?
It basically gives you way more data to work with when you edit your photos later. You have so much more control over things like color and exposure.
A raw format. Check. What about all those other settings, though? ISO, aperture, shutter speed. Should I just stick to auto mode?
I'd say resist the temptation. Auto mode can be a crutch, especially for something like golden hour, where you really want to control the look of your images.
Okay, so manual mode it is. But to be honest, all those settings kind of intimidate me.
I get it, but they're really not as scary as they seem. Let's start with ISO.
Okay, ISO. I know it's about how sensitive the camera is to light, but how do we know what to set it to during golden hour?
Well, since you usually have plenty of beautiful natural light during golden hour, you can usually keep the ISO pretty low.
Like, how low are we talking?
Set with 100 or 200. That'll give you the cleanest, sharpest images with minimal grain.
Got it, low ISO for a crisp look. Now, what about aperture?
Aperture is your key to creating that blurry background effect that everyone loves, the bokeh.
Oh, yeah, bokeh. So dreamy.
Right. For that, you want a wide aperture like f1.8 or f2.8. That'll really blur out the background and make your subject pop.
So wide aperture for portraits. Got it.
Yeah.
What are our landscapes, though? Do we still use a wide aperture?
For landscapes, it kind of depends. If you want everything in focus from the foreground to the background, then you'll want a narrower aperture like f8 or f11.
Okay, narrower aperture for landscapes to keep everything sharp. Makes sense.
But here's a cool trick. If you're shooting into the sun with a narrow aperture, you can actually create a starburst effect.
Oh, those look so cool. Like this sun has these little spikes coming out of it.
Exactly. It's a fun way to add some visual interest to your photos.
Okay, gotta try that. So wide for portraits, narrow for landscapes, and a narrow aperture facing the sun for starbursts. We've covered ISO and aperture. What about shutter speed?
Shutter speed is all about controlling motion. The general rule is to keep it at least as fast as your aperture to avoid blur from shaky hands. But don't be afraid to experiment with slower shutter speeds too, especially if you're going for a more creative look.
Okay, so slower shutter speed can create blur on purpose.
Yeah, think of that like a waterfall. With a slow shutter speed, you can make the water look all silky and smooth.
Oh, I've seen those photos. They're stunning.
Right, that's long exposure photography. You basically keep the shutter open for longer to capture the movement of the water.
Okay, so slow shutter for dreamy water effects.
Yeah.
Got it.
What about the other settings like metering modes and white balance?
For metering modes, spot metering can be really helpful during golden hour, especially if you're going for that silhouette look.
Oh, yes, silhouettes. They're so dramatic. Exactly. And as for white balance, I'd recommend setting it to shade. It'll warm up the colors and really bring out those golden tones.
Shade setting for a warmer look. Check.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all these settings are starting to make sense now, actually feeling a lot more confident. So we've got our camera settings dialed in. What about the gear itself? But what are the must-haves for golden hour photography?
Well, the first thing you'll want is a camera that allows you to shoot in manual mode, so a DSLR or a mirrorless camera.
Okay, gotta have that manual control. What about lenses?
For landscapes and cityscapes, a wide-angle lens is essential. Something like a 16-35mm for a full-frame camera would be ideal.
Wide angle for those sweeping shots. What about when the light starts to fade? Like right before sunset?
Then you'll want a fast lens, something with a wide aperture like f2.8 or wider. That'll let in more light so you can keep shooting even as it gets darker.
Okay, fast lens for low light situations. Makes sense. Anything else we should add to our golden hour kit?
Don't forget a tripod. It's essential for keeping your shots sharp, especially when you're shooting with those slower shutter speeds.
Right, gotta keep things steady. Any filters I should be looking at?
Neutral density filters, or ND filters, are great for reducing the amount of light entering the lens.
So if it's still too bright, even during golden hour, an ND filter can help.
Exactly. It lets you use slower shutter speeds even in brighter conditions.
Okay, ND filters noted. Anything else?
A circular polarizer can be super helpful too. It helps reduce glare and reflections and can make your colors look way more vibrant.
Okay, polarizer for more punchy colors. I'm learning so much. This is all starting to feel way less intimidating.
I'm glad to hear it. Remember, the most important thing is to have fun and experiment.
So true. It's all about capturing the feeling of the golden hour, right? Exactly.
Now, we can't just point and shoot, right? We've got to think about composition.
Composition, yeah, that's the part where I sometimes get stuck.
Yeah,
I'm like, how do we make sure our photos are more than just snapshots?
That's where all those classic photography rules come in handy, like the rule of thirds, weeding lines, and framing.
The rule of thirds, I know that one. It's about dividing the image into thirds, right?
Yep. And placing your subject or key elements along those lines or at the intersections, it makes your photos more balanced and visually appealing.
Okay, gotta remember that. What about leading lines? I've heard of that, but not really sure what it means.
Think about it like this: leading lines are elements in your photo that draw the viewer's eye towards a certain point.
Okay, like a road leading towards the horizon, or a fence line pointing towards a building.
Exactly. They add depth and a sense of movement to your photos.
Cool. And what about framing? Is that like putting a frame around the photo?
Not literally. Framing in photography is about using elements in the foreground to create a frame around your main subject.
Oh, I see, like shooting through a window or using some branches to frame a landscape.
Exactly. It helps create a sense of depth and draws attention to your subject.
Okay, I'm loving all these composition tips. It's like suddenly I'm seeing all these possibilities everywhere.
That's the beauty of golden hour. It just transforms everything.
So true. We've talked about landscapes and portraits, but are there any other cool subjects we could try during golden hour?
Oh, tons. Golden hour is amazing for pretty much anything. You could try still life, photography, architecture, even street photography.
Street photography during golden hour. Wouldn't it be too dark?
Not necessarily. The low light can actually create some really cool effects, like silhouettes and long shadows. It's all about experimenting.
I'm so ready to get out there and shoot now.
That's the spirit. But before you deal, we've got to talk about one more essential step: post-processing.
Post-processing, that's the part I always struggle with.
I know it can seem daunting, but it's really not that scary. It's just about enhancing the natural beauty of your golden hour photos.
Okay, so we're not talking about turning our photos into something completely different.
No way. We just want to tweak things like white balance, contrast, and maybe add a touch of color grading to really make those golden tones pop.
Okay, that sounds doable. I'm ready to learn.
Awesome.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into golden hour photography. I'm feeling so inspired.
Me too. Golden hour is truly magical, isn't it?
It totally is.
So remember those apps we were talking about for planning golden hour shoots?
So yeah, the ones that like predict where the sun will be.
Exactly. Great photo pills, Sun Surveyor, Golden Hour. Those are just a few. I seriously can't recommend them enough.
They sound super useful, but to be honest, I'm a little intimidated. Are they hard to use?
Not at all, but actually really user-friendly. You basically just put in your location and the date, and they do all calculations for you.
So they tell you like the exact times for sunrise and sunset and where the sun will be in the sky.
Yep. And they can even show you the sun's path throughout the day so you can plan your shots accordingly.
That's so cool.
Oh, I know, right? It takes all the guesswork out of planning your golden hour shoots.
I'm definitely downloading those
You
ASAP.
won't regret it, the game changers for sure. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about capturing motion during golden hour, specifically those long exposure shots that make everything look so dreamy.
Oh, yeah, those are amazing. The ones with the silky smooth water and the clouds that look like streaks of paint.
Exactly. They're so ethereal and captivating.
But to be honest, I've always been a little intimidated by long exposures. Any tips for newbie?
First things first, you absolutely need a tripod. Any little movement during a long exposure will ruin a shot. You'll end up with a blurring mess.
Okay, tripod, check. What else?
Well, then you need to choose a subject that has some movement. Water is always a good choice. Think waterfalls, ocean waves, even just a gentle stream.
Okay, moving water, got it. What about settings? Do I just set the shutter speed to slow and hope for the best?
Not quite. It takes a bit of experimentation to get the right exposure for long exposures. You need to balance the shutter speed with the aperture and ISO depending on how much light you have.
So it's a balancing act, like with most photography.
Totally, because it makes it so fun, right? There's always something new to learn and experiment with.
So true. Speaking of experimenting, we've talked about shooting landscapes, portraits, cityscapes, even still lives during golden hour. But I'm always up for a challenge. What are some truly unconventional golden hour subjects we could try?
Unconventional. What else than macro photography? Imagine capturing the intricate details of a flower or an insect with that beautiful golden light highlighting every tiny feature.
Whoa, that's a whole new level of detail there. I've never even thought about doing macro photography during golden hour.
It's a whole new world waiting to be explored, and you don't even need a ton of fancy equipment. Even a simple macro lens attachment for your phone can yield some amazing results.
Okay, macro photography added to the list. What other golden hour gems are we missing out on?
Well, what about abstract photography? Think about capturing patterns, textures, and shapes using that golden hour light to create something truly unique and artistic.
Abstract photography, I love that. It's all about seeing the world in a different way, isn't it?
Exactly. Golden hour light can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. It's all about looking for those unexpected moments of beauty and couching them in a way that evokes emotion and sparks the viewer's imagination.
Look at my creative wheels are spinning now. I'm feeling so inspired. Before we wrap up this part, though, let's circle back to post-processing. We talked about the basics earlier, but I'm ready to dive a little deeper into some more advanced techniques.
Uh,
How can we use post-processing to really elevate our golden hour photos and give them that extra wow factor?
I'm happy to share some more advanced tips. Have you ever experimented with color grading?
I've dabbled in it, but to be honest, I'm always a little hesitant to go too far. I don't want my photos to look, fake or over-edited.
I totally get that. It's definitely a balancing act. But used subtly, color grading can really enhance the mood and atmosphere of your golden hour photos. For example, you could warm up the highlights with a touch of orange or yellow to really emphasize that golden glow. Or, for a more stylized look, try adding a cool tone to the shadows.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. Warm highlights, cool shadows that would create a really unique contrast. What other color grading tricks can we try?
Have you ever heard of split toning?
Split toning. No, tell me more.
It's a technique where you add different colors to the highlights and shadows of your photo. So you could choose one color for the highlights and another for the shadows.
Wow, that sounds really cool. So for a golden hour photo, you might add a warm tone, like a golden yellow, to the highlights, and then a cool tone, like a deep blue, to the shadows.
Exactly. It can create a really subtle shift in mood or a more dramatic, stylized effect.
I love that. Okay, split toning for a more stylized look. Noted. What about those local adjustments we talked about earlier? Can you give us some more specific examples of how to use them to enhance our golden hour photos?
Of course, local adjustments are your secret weapon for fine-tuning specific areas of your image. Let's say you've taken a portrait during golden hour and the subject's face is a bit too dark. You can use a brush or a radial filter to brighten up that area without affecting the overall exposure of the image.
Oh, and that's so helpful. So we can basically control exactly how the light falls on our subject.
You got it. You can also use local adjustments to darken distracting backgrounds, enhance details in certain areas, or even create vignettes to draw the viewer's eye to your subject.
Okay, local adjustments for precise control check. What about dodging and burning? I've heard those terms thrown around, but I'm not really sure what they mean.
Dodging and burning are these classic darkroom techniques that have made their way into the digital world. Basically, dodging lightens specific areas of your photo while burning darkens them.
So it's like we're using a virtual paintbrush to add light and shadow to our photos.
Exactly. They can really enhance contrast and create a more three-dimensional look. For example, you could dodge the highlights on a subject's face to make them pop, or burn the edges of your photo to create a vignette.
Wow, I'm starting to see post-processing in a whole new light. This is amazing.
I'm glad to hear that. Remember, post-processing is just an extension of your creativity. It's about using these tools to enhance your vision and tell your story in a more compelling way.
So true. Okay, before we move on to the final part of our golden hour extravaganza, I think we need to take a quick detour and talk about something that's often overlooked, but super important: location scouting.
Yes, location scouting. It's one of my favorite parts of the process.
Mine too. There's something so exciting about exploring new places and imagining all the photographic possibilities. But I have to admit, I sometimes feel a bit lost when it comes to scouting locations. Any tips for finding those hidden gems?
Absolutely. First, remember those awesome apps we talked about earlier?
The golden hour apps.
Yep. They're not just for planning, but can be incredibly helpful for scouting locations too. You can use the satellite view to get a bird's eye perspective of an area and see what kind of vantage points are available. Some of them even have an augmented reality feature, so you can see how the light will fall on the scene at different times of day.
So, app check for virtual scouting. What other tips do you have?
Don't be afraid to explore beyond the obvious tourist spots. Sometimes the most unexpected places yield the most stunning results.
Ooh, I like that. So, venture off the beaten path. Look for those hidden alleys, those quiet parks, those rooftops with a view.
Exactly, and pay attention to the details. What are the unique elements that make this location special? What kind of mood or feeling does it evoke?
Okay, so look for the details, the mood, the feeling. What about more practical considerations like accessibility?
Accessibility is key, especially if you're carrying a lot of gear. You don't want to hike for miles with a backpack full of camera equipment only to miss the golden hour light.
Right, no one wants to be exhausted and sweaty when they're trying to capture those magical shots.
Exactly. And of course, safety should always be your top priority, especially if you're shooting in a remote location.
Absolutely. No photo is worth risking your safety for.
For sure. So always be aware of your surroundings, let someone know where you're going, and check the weather conditions before hanging out.
Okay, safety check. Now, let's talk about the most important aspect of location scouting for golden hour photography: the light. How do we assess the lighting conditions when we're scouting a location?
Think about the direction of the light. Where will the sun be rising or setting? How will the light fall on the landscape or cityscape?
Right, we want to be in a spot where it will give that beautiful, dramatic, golden hour light.
Exactly. And think about the quality of the light. Will it be soft and diffused or more intense and direct? How will that affect the look and feel of your photos?
So it's all about visualizing how that golden hour light will interact with our chosen location.
Precisely. And here's a pro tip. Try visiting the location at different times of day, even if it's not during golden hour.
Oh, that's a great idea. That way we can see how the light changes throughout the day and get a better sense of how it will look during golden hour.
Exactly. And while you're there, take some test shots with your phone or camera to experiment with different compositions and angles.
Okay, so location scouting is all about observation, visualization, and experimentation.
Absolutely. Now, in our final part, let's talk about those iconic sunset shots.
Okay, so we're ready to tackle the grand finale of golden hour photography: sunsets.
Yeah, sunsets, they're kind of the ultimate challenge, aren't they? Everyone loves a good sunset photo, but it's tough to make yours stand out.
Totally. Like, we've all seen a million sunset photos. How do we avoid those cliches and capture something really unique?
I think the key is to think beyond just the sun itself.
Okay, so like, what else should we be focusing on?
Well, for starters, look for interesting foreground elements. A silhouette against that sunset sky can add so much drama.
Oh yeah, silhouettes, I love those.
Right. It could be a tree, a person, or rock formation, anything with a strong shade. It'll give your photo a sense of depth and scale.
Okay, silhouettes, check. What about those amazing sunset colors? How do we make sure we capture those accurately?
First off, shoot in RAW format. It gives you so much more control when you're editing the colors later.
Raw format, always.
And don't be afraid to underexpose your photos a bit. It'll help you preserve those rich, saturated colors. If you overexpose, everything can get washed out.
Underexposed to keep the colors vibrant.
Okay, now let's talk composition. One of the easiest ways to make your sunset photos more interesting is to use the rule of thirds.
Rule of thirds, yeah, I know that one.
It's a classic for a reason.
Hmm.
Instead of putting the horizon right in the middle of the frame, try putting it in the upper third or the lower third. It'll make your composition more balanced and dynamic.
Okay, rule of thirds, check.
And remember those leading lines we talked about earlier? Those are super effective for sunset photos too. Use those natural lines in the landscape to draw the viewer's eye towards the sunset.
Oh, I see. So, like a path leading towards the horizon or a row of trees pointing towards the setting sun.
Exactly. It creates a sense of journey and draws the viewer into the scene.
I love that. What about reflections? Those can be still magical with sunsets.
Absolutely. If you're shooting near water, look for opportunities to capture those reflections of the sunset colors.
Reflections are the best.
And don't worry if the reflections aren't perfectly clear. Sometimes those abstract, distorted reflections can be even more interesting.
Okay, so don't be afraid of a little abstract reflection action. Got it. Now, I've seen those sunset photos where the water and clouds look all soft and dreamy, like they're in motion. What's the secret behind that effect?
You're talking about long exposures.
Long exposures, okay.
Remember what we talked about earlier? You need a tripod to keep the camera perfectly still, and then you use a slow shutter speed to capture the movement of the water and clouds.
Right, right. So it's not some kind of fancy filter or anything. It's just a slow shutter speed.
Exactly. If it's really bright out, you might need to use initial density filter or ND filter to reduce the amount of light coming into the lens. That'll allow you to use a slower shutter speed even during the day.
Okay, ND filters for daytime long exposures. Noted.
And just a reminder, practice makes perfect. Don't be afraid to experiment with different shutter speeds to see what kind of effects you can create.
That's great advice. Now, this wouldn't be a true deep dive without some inspiration from the pros. Do you have any favorite sunset photographers you could share with us?
Oh, times. But one who comes to mind is Rachel Jones Ross. She creates these incredible composite images of sunsets, blending multiple exposures and incorporating elements of fantasy and surrealism. Her work is seriously mind-blowing.
Posit images that sound so advanced.
It is. But her work is a great example of how you can use post-processing to really push the boundaries of sunset photography. Even if you're not creating composite images, you can use those tools to enhance the colors, the contrast, the overall mood of your photos.
Okay, so post-processing is a tool for creativity, not just correction. Yeah, wow. We've covered so much ground in this golden hour deep dive.
We have from gear and settings to composition and post-processing.
I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. It's been fun to explore all the different facets of golden hour photography.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners out there, get out there and shoot. Experiment, play around, and see what kind of golden hour magic you can create.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Don't be afraid to break the rules, try new things, and most importantly, have fun.
So true. And who knows, maybe you'll discover a whole new way of seeing the world through that golden hour lens.
Happy shooting, everyone.